that will actually help the American people. Enough of these games. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to point out to my colleague from Massachusetts that if we raise taxes on the oil companies, surely that will be passed along to consumers. And when I'm finished, I believe the gentleman from Colorado probably has adequate time.
I thought since you referred to me, we would have a dialogue, but I guess not. Okay.
As my colleague knows, yesterday in the Rules Committee, people on his side of the aisle talked about tax breaks and giveaways, and that again implies that all the money that hard-working taxpayers earn is government money, and that is not the way it is. The attitude about giving away money from the federal government implies that the money belongs to the government. I'd also like to point out to my colleague that the subsidies he talks about are not subsidies. They are the tax deductions, tax, quote, breaks that every manufacturer gets, not just the oil companies. And to talk about corporate welfare is a bit disingenuous. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Before further yielding, I want to briefly give the gentleman from Massachusetts 30 seconds to respond to the gentlelady.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 30 seconds.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, give me a break. I mean, oil companies are making record profits. We're producing more oil in this country than ever before. They're producing so much they're exporting oil. And at the same time, they're raising gas prices at the pump for average, ordinary citizens. The fact that taxpayers are subsidizing big oil when they're making record profits and sticking it to the American people, I think is unconscionable. And that's what I tried to get rid of. And we should at least have a vote up or down on that on the floor. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
And it's my honor to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlewoman's recognized for how long? 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I would just add one more thing. The amount of subsidies that we are giving to multinational corporations who are taking their jobs overseas, let's stop that. Let's stop the subsidies that are going to big agriculture all over this country, not small mom-and-pop farms, people who are taking care of themselves, but to big agriculture. Let's stop that. Let's also stop $147 million going to Brazilian cotton farmers as a subsidy every year. They will not tell you. They will not tell you about these subsidies. American taxpayers are footing the bill for that and paying high prices at the gas pump to get their gas, and the oil companies are rolling around in that money. I rise in opposition to this rule. Yesterday, I submitted an amendment to this bill that would have provided the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or the CFTC, with a steady, a sustainable source of funding so that it could do the job that it has been assigned to do. That's oversee the future markets, curb rampant speculation in the oil market that is causing families pain at the pump. Again, this House majority has put the profit margins of Wall Street, oil speculators, over the needs of American families and the American economy. They refuse to allow an up or down vote on this amendment. Specifically, the amendment would authorize the collection of user fees to offset the cost of the Commission's operation. It would simply bring the CFTC into line with all other federal financial regulators, such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is in keeping with a pattern by this majority to hamstring this commission at every turn. Last year, their agricultural appropriations provided only $172 million in funding, 44% below the request, meaning that we have less cops on the beat to stop speculation. We fought back. We got that up to $205 million in the final 2012 budget, but it's not enough for the Commission to do its job. Meanwhile, high oil prices affect every aspect of Americans' lives, not just the cost of traveling, but of heating homes, food, other purchases. The cost of gas is irrefutably affected by rampant speculation in the oil market. market. Goldman Sachs has estimated that speculators increased crude prices by about 20% and the price of gas by 56 cents a gallon. The chairman of ExxonMobil talked about speculation going on Wall Street. We're here to represent the American consumers, not oil speculators.
Gentlewoman's time is expired.
I'll yield an additional minute to the gentlelady.
Gentlewoman's granted.
I'm going to repeat it.
Recognized for
Our
an additional minute.
the job that all of our constituents gave to us. They gave us this job. We're here to represent their interests and the consumers, not the oil speculators. We need to ensure that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission is the agency to regulate the oil industry, that it has the resources that it needs to do the job and is doing it. The amendment that I proposed is a common-sense solution to this problem. It should have had an airing, and it should have been passed by this Congress, because that is in the best interest of American taxpayers. That's our job, and if we're not prepared to do our job, the American people should turn their backs on us and shut the place down. I urge my colleagues to oppose this rule.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to point out that our colleagues across the aisle, as well as President Obama's answer to everything is to raise taxes. But they never can explain how raising taxes would lower costs, especially on gasoline. To me, that shows how disconnected they are from economic reality. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will reserve the balance of our time.
Woman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I want to inquire of the gentlelady if she has any remaining speakers.
We have no remaining speakers, and I'm prepared to close if the gentleman's prepared to close.
Very well, then. I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Again, there were several amendments offered in Rules Committee to make this bill better. To help reduce the budget deficit, my colleague, Mr. McGovern, introduced an amendment ending $40 billion in subsidies to the oil and gas industry. As the gentlelady said, that has nothing to do with the price of gas. Getting rid of subsidies to oil companies doesn't make gas more affordable. But the question is, why are we giving money to oil and gas companies at a time when we have a national deficit? Why don't they pay taxes like every other company? I was a small businessman before I got here, and the companies that I was involved with had to pay taxes. What I don't understand is why economically a tax subsidy is any different than an expenditure subsidy. And economists across the ideological spectrum would agree a government giveaway and corporate welfare is a government giveaway in corporate welfare, whether it appears on the tax line or the expenditure line. Specifically, with regard to ending tax breaks to the oil and gas industry, Mr. McGovern's amendment, which is unfortunately ruled out of order for this bill, would end the Section 451 credit for producing oil and gas from marginal wells, and the Section 43 credit for enhanced oil recovery, and the Section 263 provision allowing the existing expansion of intangible drilling costs, and a number of other provisions that in effect give oil and gas companies a lower tax rate than other companies in this country. Look, why don't we use that money to reduce the deficit? Why don't we use that money to bring down the corporate tax rate overall, as is a key component of corporate tax reform, which I strongly support and discussed with Mr. Brady in our Rules Committee yesterday with regard to the other bill, which moves in the wrong direction with regards to bringing down our tax rates and having a simpler tax code. Mr. McGovern has offered a similar amendment to save the U.S. government $40 billion to reduce our deficit to several different bills in the past, including to an appropriations bill, an energy bill, a tax bill. Every single time, the Republicans have said, oh, it's not germane to this bill. Every single time, they voted the McGovern amendment down. Clearly, this is a proposal that's worthy of discussion. If it's not a tax discussion and not an energy discussion, not an expenditure discussion, well, what kind of discussion is it? And why can't we be talking about reducing the deficit here on the floor of the House instead of continuing to spend unnecessary money on subsidies? It's funny how the majority party waives rules when it's convenient for their agenda, but refuses to apply a consistent standard to an amendment that is worthy of consideration by this House. At the same time oil companies have record profits, we're continuing to subsidize oil injection, extraction, exploration, drilling, manufacturing, pricing, and inventory valuing by creating price floors, offsetting foreign taxes, providing generous credits and deductions, providing tax shelters, and allowing the valuation of inventories at deeply discounted prices. If we are serious about deficit reduction, let us take this opportunity to vote down this rule and allow for the discussion of the McGovern Amendment. We need to close these loopholes and allow for real deficit reduction. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment to the rule in the record along with the extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection, so ordered.
And this amendment is the Bishop bill and the Corrine Brown bill, which would simply allow the House the opportunity to vote on the Senate bill, which, given the strong bipartisan majority in the Senate, I believe would pass the House of Representatives. At least let's give it a chance. Let's give the House a chance to work its will, Democrats and Republicans, and see where we really are with regard to this Congress's commitment to critical infrastructure needs in this country. Voting down this rule would be the first step in allowing Mr. Bishop and Ms. Brown to come forward with the Senate bill for consideration in this House, which provides some certainty to state and local planners, allowing them to reduce cost, get better value for the taxpayer dollar. And I also strongly encourage the majority to consider allowing amendments and good ideas from both sides of the aisle in bills like the transportation bill. And let us work to find an appropriate time and appropriate place for the consideration of Mr. McGovern's bill and Mr. McGovern's amendment, and whether the proceeds are used to reduce the deficit or bring down corporate taxes or some split thereof or other worthy public purposes. Surely we can, at this juncture, when we cannot afford the government we have, help reduce the size and the scope of government by ending subsidies and giveaways to big multinational oil companies. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question. I strongly urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, yield back the balance of my time, and move the previous question on the resolution.
Gentlewoman yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from
on that
Colorado.
I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adopting the resolution, if ordered, and agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. This is a 15-minute vote.
This is the first of 3 votes in the House. Right now they are voting on passing the Senate version of the transportation bill. 2 more votes to follow. There'll be a vote next on the rule for the House transportation bill, then a 3rd vote in this sequence on approving the journal, which is the official proceedings of the previous day. After these votes are finished, the House will move on to general debate and amendments on the transportation bill. Final votes expected around 3:30 to 3:45 p.m. this afternoon. The transportation bill is a 90-day extension of mass transit and highway and also includes approval of the XL pipeline.
floor the first of 3 votes, 2 of which are related to the Surface Transportations Bill, the 90-day extension. This is the previous question vote, as Democrats are looking to add an amendment to the rule which would allow them to bring up the Senate-passed transportation measure. So previous question vote, a vote on the rule is coming up next, and one more vote after that. The 2 following votes after this will be 5-minute votes. The White House has issued a veto threat on the transportation bill, and that's mainly due to the Keystone Pipeline language that's included in the bill, and that will come up to debate today as an amendment to the bill. The Senate is in today, and they continue debate still pending rather, is the consideration of the modernization, the overhaul of the postal system. You can follow the Senate on C-SPAN 2. The Senate Budget Committee will be meeting shortly to look at the 2013 budget resolution. That markup gets underway at 2 o'clock Eastern. You can follow that on C-SPAN 3. We'll also have it online at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 243, the nays are 180. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted.
I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. If a sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by an electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
It's a vote on the rule for a 90-day extension of the transportation bill. The rule would provide for an hour of general debate and consideration of 3 amendments. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter who's covering the transportation debate. Nathan Hurst is with Congressional Quarterly. Why is the House bringing up another 90-day extension of the Surface Transportation Programs bill when they just did one in the spring recess?
Well, this is actually another new tactic that the House GOP has taken up, as they've had quite a bit of a problem selling their 5-year, $260 billion transportation bill to their own caucus, especially with no Democratic support. They just don't have the 218 votes they need to pass it. So this latest extension actually is going to have 3 amendments that are going to be voted on, one of which brings up a lot of the project expediting and deregulation parts of the transportation bill. They're hoping to take this bill as basically a shell bill with that, and also a provision to pass to approve the Keystone XL pipeline against the Senate's bill, a 2-year, $109 billion measure that's already passed, and go to conference with that bill. This would also give them a little more time on the conference committee through September 30th to complete all that work.
Why are the House Republicans so determined to get the Keystone Pipeline approved?
Well, this has been a big legislative priority of theirs. This is the 4th time that they've tried to attach it to basically unrelated legislation. As the GOP is going into an election year where they've got a lot at stake, they're really taking the issue of high gas prices and pushing that hard legislatively. Keystone is seen as a key part of that legislative approach, and it's kind of also seen as a sweetener for a number of House GOP conservatives who have made that a priority but necessarily weren't as excited about the transportation bill on its own.
You mentioned that the idea is to pass the bill, go to conference on the Senate 2-year bill that they've passed. So what does that mean? What does that do with the status of that 5-year bill that Transportation Chair John Mica had been pushing?
Well, essentially, that's leaving it on the table, though, again, one of the amendments that's coming up today with this extension is a number of the deregulation and expediting provisions. And so what they're hoping to do is take some of those stronger provisions, that certainly much stronger than what the Senate produced, and put those up against the 2-year bill, which essentially at this point would serve as an extension just to get transportation programs to the end of 2013.
Is the House bill today likely to attract any Democratic support?
Oh, no. The House Democrats have really pushed for passage of the Senate bill. They, of course, introduced their own version of that, hoping H.R. 14, hoping to get that through. But and they've really expressed no interest in working with House Transportation and Infrastructure Chairman John Mica on this bill, because they felt like they weren't included in the legislative process there. The bill was really targeted at getting Republican votes. There's not a lot in there for Democrats, and so they said that they would like to see the Senate bill instead.
What are the chances in that negotiation and that conferees can work out the differences between an ultimately passed House bill and the Senate version? Senate
Democrats definitely feel like they still have somewhat of an upper hand because they have more concrete language here. Of course, the Keystone provision is seen as political anathema to the Democrats, so they're not very excited about having to work with that. But they do feel like they have some significant leverage, and going into that, considering the Republicans are bringing in a shell bill and not a fully passed transportation bill, it does give the Democrats in the Senate a lot more leverage on transportation provisions and particularly funding mechanisms.
Nathan Hurst is with Congressional Quarterly, and you can read his reporting at CQ.com. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
On this vote, the yeas are 246, the nays are 177. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The House approves the rule for debate on the extension, the 90-day extension of transportation programs. Ahead will be an hour of general debate and consideration of 3 amendments. This is the last in a series of votes. This is the journal vote. The Senate is in today, and the Senate Budget Committee gavels in shortly in about 10 minutes or so, 2 p.m. Eastern, to consider the 2013 budget resolution. Senator Kent Conrad is the chair, and you can follow that on C-SPAN 3, also online at cspan.org.
this vote, the yeas are 295, nays are 118 with 2 voting present. The journal stands approved. Members will please clear the well and take their conversations from the floor. If members will please clear the well, take their conversations from the floor. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 4348.
Without objection, so ordered. To House Resolution 619 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 4348. The Chair appoints a gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
We ready? The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 4348, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide an extension of federal aid highway safety, motor carrier safety, transit, and other programs funded out of the Highway Trust Fund pending enactment of a multi-year law reauthorizing such programs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, and the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Ray Hall, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I believe the House is still not in order, and we want to proceed on this bill.
Committee will be in order. Would everyone take their conversations off the floor? Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
First of all, I ask unanimous consent that the exchange of letters between the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Ways and Means Committee be included in the congressional record.
The request is covered by general.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I reserve the, I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Chairman and members of the House, today we bring up the Surface Transportation Extension Act of 2012. This is the second part of an extension that we passed previously. Just before the Congress recessed and went into the Easter work period and holiday, the House did pass a 90-day extension, and that extension expires on June 30th, 2012. The extension before us today is an additional 90-day extension, and the purpose of this extension is that we can hopefully bring about resolution and conference legislation to complete our transportation bill. Now, the previous extension was the 9th extension, and the Democrats, the other side of the aisle, were forced to pass 6 extensions. So I'm hoping that this will be our last extension and also provide us a vehicle to conclude this important work that so many jobs across this country are relying on, that the building of our nation's infrastructure is tied to this, this work and completion of this important task. This is a fairly clean extension. There are a couple of provisions in here, I think, that will provide increased energy for the country. And if anyone has not felt the pain at the pump All they need to do is go to a local gas station. I saw today the lowest cost gas in a local station, not a couple blocks from here, was $4.45 a gallon. And this particularly hurts the working men and women of America and those on fixed or limited income. And I think the provision that we have here is a excellent provision, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this, again, is a vehicle that can deliver us to completion of the important work. This extension has levels of funding that are consistent with the transportation appropriations bill signed by the President in November. And then we'll consider, I believe, 3 amendments that have been made in order by the Rules Committee. Let me talk about them again very briefly. First, the Keystone Pipeline provision. You know, this administration is still meandering and not only on transportation legislation, but also on energy legislation, and has not found their way, unfortunately, for the American people. But this bill can provide us some reliable sources of energy. We're talking about a pipeline and a source from a good ally and neighbor in the North American continent. We're not talking about relying on Venezuela, the Middle East, or Nigeria, where we get a lot of our supplies for energy today. So it can provide some, again, stability, some reduction in price for the consumer, particularly when they're so hard hit at this time. So we'll have more to talk about with it in regard to the Keystone Pipeline. This pipeline's been studied to death. This administration for over 3 years has delayed approval. The President has approved a small part in one section of the country, or at least he says he would, and you can't build a pipeline that can actually deliver energy at lower cost and reliable fuel in a piecemeal fashion. This project, Keystone Pipeline, has been studied for, what, 3.5 years now. Well, they built the entire Alaska pipeline in that period of time. So the time for studying, for delay, and for not acting on reducing energy costs and increasing supply has ended. Additionally, we have a couple of other provisions in here which I'm supportive of. One is the Restore Act, which creates the Gulf Restoration Trust Fund, and that provides for a fair and equitable manner for division of the penalties collected by those responsible for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So I think that that is a provision that can also help a lot of our Gulf states that were hard hit and impacted by that disaster. And finally, I think that another amendment that I think is very laudatory is one by Mr. Ribble. I think has been made in order, and that carries from H.R. 7 a lot of the streamlining provisions that we think are so important to getting projects done. You know, President Obama promised us infrastructure when they sold a $787 billion so-called stimulus package. Mr. Oberstar and I came back here. At the time, they were looking at a $250 to $300 billion stimulus bill, of which 50% would be, in fact, infrastructure. As it turned out, it was 6 or 7%, some $63 billion. And last October, there was still 35% of the $63 billion for infrastructure stuck in the Treasury in Washington, D.C., 2.5 years after we passed stimulus. So you can pass all the transportation bills you want, and if you can't deliver the project and cut the red tape and paperwork that Washington thrives on, then you can't get anything done. So that provision is so important to moving transportation legislation forward that can make a difference in getting projects done. In the hearings that we did across the country, starting in Mr. Ray Hall's district, the Democrat leader of the committee in Beckley, West Virginia, we heard at every single hearing all the way to the West Coast when we did a bipartisan, unprecedented bicameral with Senator Boxer hearing on that coast. Every single hearing almost without question, and most of the witnesses all said that we needed to speed up the projects. Shovel-ready has become a national joke, and we've got to end that sad commentary, that sad joke that doesn't allow us to go forward, and I think the Ribble Amendment will do that. So with that, again, I think we have a vehicle that we can get to conference, work in a bipartisan and bicameral manner to get the job done, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.